Hi again then guys, and welcome to another review of a specific car from the 1.19 update, and this is our first move away from the Group C Le Mans prototypes, of course, into another exotic category. Funnily enough, way more expensive than all three of those Le Mans cars put together. In fact, you could buy all three of them a few times over for the price of this one car. This is the vehicle that single-handedly took the value of the car pack from 3.6 million, or thereabouts, actually more like 3.5, up to 18.5 million, because this car alone is 15 million credits, just like it was on Gran Turismo 6, and the car in question is a fan favourite, not necessarily one which most players own due to the price, but those who do own it get quite a bit of use out of it. Because of the classic collector's cars in the franchise, it's actually one of the most useful. Because if you really think about it and break down the ridiculously expensive cars like the Daytona, the 250 GTO, the GT40, various others that were on Gran Turismo 6, the vast majority of those are race cars, with the only exceptions really being this one and the Mark 1 GT40, which was a lot cheaper, of course, at 2.8 million. Those two alone, pretty much, as far as I can recall at least, are the ones which are eligible for really competitive road racing. You've got the Abarth concept as well, but not so much. That's not really all that quick. The Miura, though, this is an excellent classic sports car to use in competition in the past of the Gran Turismo franchise. So what about now? Now that stuff like performance points are gone and stuff is ranked by power instead. Well, of course, if you are a follower of the channel, you'll have noticed earlier on today that we're on a bit of a Miura kick, and one of those videos was, of course, a tune setup for this very Miura in the N300 category to allow it to earn around 2 million credits an hour, just like the GT40 can as well on Blue Moon Bay. So, straight off the bat, this is a car which could very easily, and funnily enough, very quickly pay for itself. You do that event 40 times, which sounds like a huge amount, but that's about a couple of weeks, say, if you do it a couple of times a day, for instance. That's not too bad for a car that's so expensive. In fact, one of the most expensive cars in the game. Now, when you actually buy the car, what you get is a 3.9 litre mid-mounted engine, rear-wheel drive, of course, and in stock form, you're looking at a fraction under 350 horsepower, which, for its age, is pretty good, 272 pound-feet of torque, and I would say best of all is the weight. Because the car, of course, is not a race car. It is a road-going supercar, one of the earliest supercars ever developed, but it still only weighs 980 kilos. And that means that even for its time, in stock form, and even by today's standards, in fact, the horsepower per tonne is actually really good for a car like this. For a car that has less than 350 horsepower, to be putting out more than 350 horsepower per tonne is a very good sign. 356 horsepower per tonne is what you're working with as standard, and it's in the N400 category, but only barely. You reduce it down to 98% power and you're immediately bumped down into N300. Now, in terms of performance, it's nowhere near as quick as it was, of course, on Gran Turismo 6. On that game, it's around a 260 mph car without NOS, without slipstream. It's not that quick now, but again, it's still a great rival for, in particular, that GT40. Not necessarily as much the Ferrari or the Jaguar XJ13, because again, being in Group X, they're not the most raceable things around. But still, in a general sense, it's a great rival for those, and unlike a race car, it doesn't have the massive amount of downforce hindering its top-end speed, so it's actually quite quick, even though the speed isn't as high as it used to be. Now, the main disadvantage, I would say, of the Miura, beyond the price itself, which is a big disadvantage for many people, or at least they see it that way, is that the cost of upgrading the car is astronomical. Now, it's not quite as ridiculous as the two Group X classics. They cost like 10,000 mileage points to upgrade, whereas this one, you're looking at about 3,500 points just to drop the weight. So it's a lot. It costs a lot. You have to drive a lot, really earn up those points, and even when you're doing Blue Moon Bay, it still takes you a while to earn those kind of points. That's a good few events. in a general sense, that's pretty much the only downside to the car, I would say, in a strict way at least. But what about in terms of track potential? Because of course it's not just about straight line speed, it's not even about oval racing, it's about the all-round package. When you're spending that kind of money on a car in the game even, you want to know that you can get some use out of it, hopefully at least. Well, in that regard, I would say it's definitely better so far than both the Ferrari P4 and the Jaguar XJ13, because you can actually use it. You can race this car in the N categories, whereas they just don't have that option, at least for the moment. Now, if you do use the car around a track, it falls into that kind of camp that any classic performance car will, wherein it could very easily swing either way. It could be really slippery and really challenging, something like a Cobra or a Stratos or a Dome Zero even, if you don't tune it correctly. Or it could fall more in the category of something like an E-Type Jaguar or a Ford GT40, where in the past of the franchise they've been really, really good to work with and highly competitive. Or a Mazda RX 500, that's another perfect example. In fact, that one's almost too good for a classic. Well, I would say it falls, funnily enough, somewhere in between. It's definitely not as adept a track car as the GT40 is, which isn't too surprising. The GT40 is, of course, a road-spawned race car, whereas this one isn't quite that extreme. But for its time, this is still a really good car. There are relatively few classics in the game that can give a genuine rivalry to this one. The GT40 is definitely the main one, for now at least. So if you do decide to set aside the time, of course, the racing, and the money, ultimately, to buy the Miura, which I would recommend, then it is nice to know that if you do choose to, you can get use out of it. It's a car that can easily pay for itself in the Blue Moon Bay event, and it can easily be used not just now but potentially in the future when more classics are, hopefully, at least added to the game, stuff like the Panteras, the GT40s, the Cobras, that you can still continue to use the car. Plus, of course, you've always got the cool factor of driving around in an obscenely expensive car. So the sound is good, the handling depends a lot, of course, on the tyres that you're on. I would say that no car or car category can change as wildly as classics do, depending on the tyre choice. With a race car, you can put it on sports tyres, the downforce and the setup of the car can help you to some degree. With a classic though, there's very few, if any, other categories of vehicle where you notice such a huge difference based purely on the tyres. Going from sports tyres to racing tyres makes a world of difference to any classic performance car. So in that regard, choose your tyres carefully, choose your event carefully. I would recommend using the Miura on circuits where you can use more of its straight line speed, because that's what it's really good for, even back in the day it was. So as long as you use it under the right circumstances, it's one of the best classics in the game for sure. We'll have to see how that pans out in the future, but for now, I would say it's definitely worth checking out. But that's it for this pick, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.